Hello and welcome to Revelations and Grace. I'm John Paul, and today we're continuing to identify the characters of Revelation. We've discussed in previous videos how Revelation is a book written in symbols and how it concerned events that were about to take place after its book was written. Well, today we're going to be identifying another such character, the land beast mentioned in chapter 13. Now, in chapter 13, it first discussed a sea beast, which we earlier identified as Rome and its 7 Caesars. Well, in the second half of the chapter, it discusses a beast emerging out of the land, and I'm going to read it and we're going to identify its clues and see who it best applies to in that first century. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. He makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, even making fire come down out of the sky to the earth in the sight of the people. He deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast who had the sword wound and lived. It was given to him to give breath to it, to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as wouldn't worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, to be given marks on their right hands or on their foreheads, and that no one would be able to buy or sell unless he has that mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. He who has understanding, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. In the next video, we'll discuss the mark of the beast and go more into detail on that. But in this video, I want to focus on who this land beast was. We receive several clues about this beast. For one, he comes up out of the earth, and throughout the book of Revelation, the earth often represents Israel. We see in chapter 17 that he describes foreign nations and languages and multitudes as the sea, which would imply that the earth would be the ones local to where the book of Revelation was, or the ones local to the Jewish people, Israel. We see that this beast had 2 horns like a lamb, and in apocalyptic imagery, horns often represent kings or rulers. So this land beast probably had 2 rulers or 2 kings. It looked like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. That's another such clue. A lamb in apocalyptic imagery, or at least in the book of Revelation, represents a Messiah figure. Jesus is known as the Lamb, and it speaks like a dragon, which a dragon is a lying creature. So it's representing a type of false Messiah. It exercises all the authority of the first beast, or Rome, in its presence. So whoever this authority is, he's ruling over Rome. It causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, or Rome, whose fatal wound was healed. And if you recall in a previous video, we discussed how Nero stabbed himself in the neck, causing his own suicide. And that put Rome into a very dark place where people thought the empire was going to fall. And it went into a year of civil war. And that civil war didn't end until Vespasian and Titus rose to power and revived it from the brink of destruction, and that was seen as a resurrection of Rome. We see that this beast performs great signs, and he even makes fire come down out of the sky. We'll touch on that later. And John says he deceives my own people, the Jews. So this is a clue that he's not referring to this entity being a Jewish entity, because whoever this is, it deceives the Jews. So I don't know. I mean, it could still be a Jewish entity, but I think it makes more sense that this is more of a Roman entity. And he causes them to let's see here, to be deceived because of the signs he was able to do in the front of the beast. And let's see here, he was given breath. He gave breath to the image of the beast so that it should both speak and cause as many as wouldn't worship the image of the beast to be killed. Okay, and I believe that this is most aptly fulfilled in the joint reign of Vespasian and Titus when Rome was resurrected under their leadership. So the earth often represents Israel, and Vespasian and Titus were both initially proclaimed emperors while they were campaigning in Judea during the war before they returned to Rome to retake it. And this fulfills that picture that they rose out of the earth. These two leaders rose out of Judea. Secondly, the metaphor of rising out of the earth is a picture of a resurrection, which was what happened when Titus and Vespasian brought peace and stability back to Rome and renewed hopes and confidence in the empire. And that was seen as a revival, a resurrection of Rome itself. And that caused amazement, and the people worshiped Rome again in its might and its ability to overcome adversity because of the stability these two leaders brought. We see that this beast had two horns, and Vespasian and Titus reigned as joint Caesars, and they even shared the same name, Titus Flavius Vespasianus. And Daniel 7 even confirms that horns often represent kings or rulers. In Daniel 7, he sees a picture of 10 horns, and he later tells, the angel later tells Daniel that these are 10 kings who will arise. We know that Revelation 13:12 says that this land beast exercises all the authority of the first beast. Well, Vespasian and Titus were the Caesars of Rome and had all the authority of Rome and were worshipped in Rome and commanded reverence and loyalty. Not only that, but they created signs of Rome that they would bring into their battles and on their banners and flags and ensigns. It was the images of Caesar and Rome. The image of Rome was called the Aquila, and the image of the reigning emperor was called the Imago. And even during the War of the Jews, the Romans would worship these images. And when the temple was destroyed, Titus brought these images into the temple, and the Romans worshiped them there, and the Jews were also forced to worship them or face severe consequences. So they forced the inhabitants of Jerusalem to worship this image of the beast. And this image was also given breath and life. And we see that because Titus was the living embodiment of Caesar. He was a joint Caesar with Vespasian, who was in Rome. And he was giving voice and character to this image where they could see one of the actual Caesars in this battle. So this fulfills the scripture that they were making that happen. We know that the false prophet performs significant signs in the presence of the first sea beast. So he performs false signs and he deceives the world. Well, in order to, identify who this character is when it's mentioned later in the book, we need to compare it with the beast. There are 3 passages that later reference the beast and a false prophet. Now, when the false prophet is first mentioned in Revelation 16, it's mentioned as if it's a character that's been previously introduced, yet there is no mention of a false prophet before chapter 16. And so this likely refers to the land beast because they both share the same traits. In Revelation 16, it says, "And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs." So this shows that it distinguishes between the beast, which would have referred to the sea beast, and the false prophet, which referred to this land beast we're talking about. And again, it distinguishes in chapter 19, verse 20. "And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire." And we see it again in Revelation 20:10. "And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire, where the beast and the false prophet were." So these refer to the land and the sea beast, or the sea beast and the land beast. And so Revelation doesn't introduce a character named the false prophet. This title first appears again in that chapter. And only the land beast aligns with these characteristics. If you compare Revelation 13:14, which talks about the land beast, and 19:20, you see they share the same traits. In Revelation 13:14, it says, "He," referring to the land beast, "deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast who had the sword wound and lived." Later in chapter 19, he's describing the false prophet. "The beast was taken, and with him the false prophet who worked the signs in his sight, with which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. So this false prophet is the one deceiving those who have the mark of the beast and worship its image. And we see in this chapter, he is allowed to perform false signs to deceive those on the earth and make them worship the image of the beast, showing that the false prophet mentioned later in the book is connected with this land beast. We also learn that this land beast is described as a lamb that spoke like a dragon. And we see that right here. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And again, a lamb is often a picture of a Messiah figure in Revelation. It's a picture of Jesus, who is the Lamb of God. And the fact that it speaks like a dragon shows that it was a false Messiah. And so when we compare all this information about the false prophet with the information about the land beast, we see that these characters are both describing one and the same. The false prophet is the land beast. And Vespasian aptly fulfills this role. He was the false prophet and a false Messiah. He performed great signs and saw himself as the Jewish Messiah. We see that in Tacitus, called The History. He was a Roman historian, and he wrote about during the Jewish War, or after the Jewish War. And he wrote in chapter 6, section 13, prodigies had occurred, which this nation, prone to superstition, but hating all religious rites, did not deem it lawful to expiate by offering and sacrifice. There had been seen hosts joining battle in the skies. He's describing an event that occurred in 66 AD with the angelic army seen on the skies. The fiery gleam of arms, the temple illuminated by a sudden radiance from the clouds. The doors of the inner shrine were suddenly thrown open, and a voice of more than one mortal tone was heard to cry that the gods were departing. At the same instant there was a mighty stir as of their departure. Some few put a fearful meaning on these events, but in most there was a firm persuasion that in the ancient records of their priest was contained a prediction of how at this very time the East was to grow powerful, and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire a universal empire. So Tacitus is describing these miraculous events and how the Jews interpreted that as that was a sign that they were going to take ownership of the world and that their war was going to be successful. However, Tacitus corrects this belief, and he says, actually, these mysterious prophecies had pointed to Vespasian and Titus, and he was referring to these Old Testament prophecies concerning the coming Messiah. And what he was saying was that Vespasian and Titus were the fulfillment of this Messiah. Of course, he falsely said this. He wasn't a Christian. But this is what the Romans believed, that the prophecies in the Old Covenant concerning the Messiah represented Vespasian. At least that's what he wanted people to believe. And he's complaining that the people didn't see that. So Vespasian he called himself the Jewish Messiah. And in fact, he did a couple miracles by these false signs that the demons performed. And we read about that in his histories, Tacitus' Histories, chapter 4, section 81. He says, in the months during which Vespasian was awaiting at Alexandria for the prodigal return of the summer gales and settled weather at sea, many wonders occurred which seemed to point him out as the object of the favor of heaven and of the partiality of the gods. One of the common people of Alexandria, well known for his blindness, threw himself at the emperor's knees and implored him with groans to heal his infirmity. This he did by the advice of the god Serapis, whom this nation, devoted as it is to many superstitions, worships more than any other divinity. He begged Vespasian that he would deign to moisten his cheeks and eyeballs with his spittle. Another, with a diseased hand, at the counsel of the same god, prayed that the limb might feel the print of Caesar's foot. At first, Vespasian ridiculed and was repulsed by them, or he repulsed them. They persisted, and he, though on the one hand he feared the scandal of a fruitless attempt, yet on the other was induced by the entreaties of the men and by the language of his flatteries to hope for success. At last he ordered that the opinion of the physicians should be taken as to whether such blindness and infirmity were within reach of human skill. They discussed the matter from different points of view. In one case, they said, the faculty of sight was not wholly destroyed, and might return if the obstacles were removed. In the other case, the lamb which had fallen into a diseased condition might be restored if a healing influence were applied. Such perhaps might be the pleasure of the gods, and the emperor might be chosen to be the minister of the divine will. At any rate, all the glory of a successful remedy would be to Caesar's, while the ridicule of failure would fall on the sufferers. And so Vespasian, supposing that all things were possible to his good fortune, and that nothing was any longer past belief, with a joyful countenance amid the intense expectation of the multitude of bystanders, accomplished what was required. The hand was instantly restored to its use, and the light of day again shone upon the blind. Persons actually present attest both facts, even now when nothing is to be gained by a falsehood. So these were prophecies. These were specific miracles that were said to be fulfilled in the Jewish Messiah. And so we have Vespasian performing these false signs conducted by demons to kind of prove his claim that he was the Jewish Messiah. We also read in Cassius Dio other miraculous signs that the Romans interpreted as that Vespasian was meant to be their ruler. And we have, I believe the context of this, we have Vitellius is ruling, and I believe Vespasian's in Judea, and there's all these signs going on before the war. And it says, while he was behaving in this way, evil omens occurred. A comet was seen, and the moon, contrary to precedent, appeared to suffer 2 eclipses, being obscured on the 4th and on the 7th day. Also, people saw 2 suns at once, one in the west weak and pale, and one in the east brilliant and powerful. On the Capitol, many huge footprints were seen, presumably of some spirits that had descended from it. The soldiers who had slept there on the night in question said that the temple of Jupiter had opened itself with a great clangor, and that some of the guards had been so terrified that they fainted. At the same time that this happened, Vespasian, who was engaged in warfare with the Jews, learned of the rebellion of Vitellius and Otho, and was deliberating what he should do. So these signs were seen as evidence that Vespasian was meant to be the ruler of Rome. Tacitus also recorded other miracles that occurred and were interpreted favorably for Vespasian. And we read about those in chapter 1, section 86. He says, prodigies were now noised abroad from various sources, increased men's terror. It was said that in the porch of the Capitol of the reins of the chariot, on which stood the goddess of victory, had dropped from her hand, that from the capital of Juno, the chapelle of Juno, there had rushed forth a form greater than the form of man, that the statue of the divine Julius, which stands on the island of Tiber, had turned from the west to the east on a calm and tranquil day, that an ox had spoken aloud in Etruria, and that strange births of animals had taken place, besides many other things, such as in barbarous ages are observed, even during seasons of peace, but are now heard only in times of terror. But an alarm greater than all, because it connected immediate loss with fears of the future, arose from a sudden inundation of the Tiber. So he begins talking about how this river flooded Rome. But it's interesting because all these miraculous events were happening, and the Romans were interpreting this as if it was proof that Vespasian was going to be their god and rule. So this is the demons performing these false signs and the false prophet role, pointing to Vespasian, who saw himself as this false Messiah. Now, this false prophet, we also learn that these spirits of demons come out of the mouth of the false prophet and they perform signs, and he uses these signs to gather power for himself, and he gathers his armies together for a war at a place called, which we know as Armageddon, or as the World English Bible says in Hebrew, Megiddo. And Megiddo is actually a mountain right outside of Israel and Jerusalem. Here is a map of it, and we have Jerusalem right here, and Megiddo right here. It's right next to Mount Carmel, or it's part of the Mount Carmel mountain range. And this is an actual place, and this is where, in fact, all of the Roman armies gathered and conducted their camps and prepared for war. Titus's armies would travel through the land in Turkey up here, and they would come down the valley, and they would come right here to Mount Megiddo and wait here. And Vespasian would sail to Egypt and travel up from Egypt to Megiddo, and this is where they encamped before doing their war in Jerusalem. And it doesn't actually say in the Bible that there was a great battle here, contrary to popular belief. It just says that they gathered them together in this place. This is where the armies were gathered to prepare for the war. So that's a distinction worth noting. We also know that this land beast brings fire down from heaven. We learn that he causes fire to come down out of the sky to the earth in the sight of the people. Well, this is a picture of what the Romans did during their sieges. They would catapult rocks that were on fire into the city. And this happened in 70 AD, but it also happened in the Battle of Jotapata. And Josephus has a great quote where he describes the nature of these stones that were being cast. So this is during the Battle of Jotapata, and Josephus is describing what he saw. At the same time, such engines, that is the catapults, as were intended for that purpose, threw at once lances upon them with a great noise, and stones of the weight of a talent. A talent is roughly 75 to 100 pounds, which, if you recall, the book of Revelation mentions hailstones weighing a talent falling into the city. We'll discuss that later. But Josephus describes that these stones were weighing a talent and were thrown by the engines that were prepared for that purpose. And he adds, together with fire and a vast multitude of arrows, which made the wall so dangerous that the Jews durst not only not come upon it, but durst not come upon the parts within the wall that were reached by the engines. So these stones were cast with fire, and this would fulfill the prophecy that this false prophet, Vespasian and Titus, were making fire fall from the sky in the sight of the people, fulfilling that role. And we learn that the false prophet, or the land beast, is captured and thrown alive into the lake of fire. And that lake of fire symbolizes God's divine punishment and the afterlife experience of the enemies of God. Well, Vespasian got sick and died after seeing a falling star in 79 AD, which was kind of seen as a divine punishment. And we learn about that in Cassius Dio, book 66, and I'm in section 17 here. And it writes, "It was after the events just narrated that Vespasian fell sick, not, if the truth be known, of his accustomed gout, but of a fever, and passed away at the Aquae Cutulae, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, in the Sabine country. Some, however, in the endeavor falsely to incriminate Titus, among them the Emperor Hadrian, spread the report that he was poisoned at a banquet. Portents had occurred indicating his approaching end, such as the comet which was visible for a long time, and the opening of the mausoleum of Augustus of its own accord. When his physicians chided him for continuing his usual course of living during his illness and attending to all the duties that belonged to his office, he answered, 'The emperor ought to die on his feet.'" And you can read more about this, but there was a comet, and the Romans saw comets as the ending of a emperor's reign. So this was seen as a bad omen for Vespasian. And also we hear that the mausoleum of Augustus opened of its own accord. I'm guessing that's like a big door that opened itself that wouldn't have been able to do that. And these were divine events that symbolize that Vespasian's rule was going to end. And he fell sick with a fever. So that shows like his ending through divine punishment. And then, of course, 2 months later, Mount Vesuvius erupted, and it covered 2 cities of Rome in a lake of fire. And Titus, he also died under what could be seen as divine punishment. He died suddenly of a fever 2 years later when thunder was heard from a clear sky. And we read about that in Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars, the life of Titus. In section 10 it says, "In the meantime he was cut off by death to the loss of mankind rather than to his own. After finishing the public games, at the close of which he wept bitterly in the presence of the people, he went down to the Sabine territory, somewhat cast down because a victim had escaped as he was sacrificing, and because it had thundered from a clear sky. So here we hear about thunder from a clear sky. Then, at the very first stopping place, he was seized with a fever, and as he was being carried on from there, in a litter, it is said that he pushed back the curtains, looked up to heaven, and lamented bitterly that his life was being taken from him, contrary to his deserts. For he said that there was no act of his life of which he had cause to repent, save one only. So Titus ended up dying from this sudden fever that was brought on after it thundered from a clear sky. So kind of a picture of divine judgment there. And this would fall in line that Vespasian and Titus were thrown into this lake of fire. They were punished by God and would await a further punishment after they died for their evil. And of course Rome was punished, and this would fulfill that. So these are all reasons to suggest that Vespasian and Titus, these joint Caesars, or these joint Flavian rulers, were represented by the land beast depicted in Revelation. And in Revelation 13, we hear that they have two horns like a lamb, which these were the two rulers that came out of the earth. That is, they resurrected the Roman Empire, and they were initially proclaimed emperors in Judea. They looked like a lamb, meaning they looked like a Messiah, but they spoke like a dragon. That is, they were false. They exercised the authority of the first beast, that is Rome. So they were the Roman emperors. They caused the world to worship Rome, and they performed great signs, and we saw several of those signs. They made fire come down out of the sky. We see that in the Roman stones that they would cast down upon the Jewish cities that were on fire. They deceived my own people, and that's a clue. John's writing this concerning Jews, and that means that these Roman emperors were able to deceive the Jews, that they should worship the image of the beast, and we see that happen when Titus destroys the temple and forces the Jews to worship the imago and the Aquila on the Roman banners of Titus. We see that they gave breath to these images because Titus was the living embodiment of this Roman emperor who was local in Judea at the time he was forcing them to worship. So these characters seem to fulfill all the roles. And as with everything I share, I ask that you pray and you consider the things I'm sharing and you study it for yourself to see if these things are true. And in the next video, we're going to be discussing the mark of the beast and who this mark points to and how it was fulfilled in history. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have. And we've identified most or all of the major characters in Revelation, and now we can start focusing on more of the experiences and the events that this book describes and how they were fulfilled in the first century. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.